that Sarah Boone has been traumatized. That Sarah Boone is still traumatized. And the reason for the trauma is Jorge Torres. The reason for the trauma is Jorge Torres. From the positive things about the man that we've seen on video, to the positive things Sarah Boone has testified about, to the violent monster he becomes. And I mean monster, because it was repeatedly. And what happens the next day? Man, I don't remember. I was drunk. I don't remember. That's the gaslighting. That this young woman, vulnerable woman with nobody, just starving for love, starving for attention, and seeing the good in the man. And it was good. But every day was on the balance. She measured every day, depending on how it started and then how it ended. And that's the way she had to live her life. Day in and day out. Day in and day out. Dr. Harper and Dr. Brandon talked about trauma. Dr. Harper spoke of the veterans that she had treated for post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know if you remember her testimony, but she spoke about some of the veterans that had been in the war in Iraq, you know, and people in war a lot of times get post-traumatic stress. It used to be called shell shock and other things. But people in wartime, or police officers will get post-traumatic stress. And a lot of them come in, the males come in with this bravado, I'm all right. I'm all right. And so that's why Dr. Harper was talking about the veterans. That's what they'll do. But you got to spend time with them. It just can't be one session. And you've got to run post-traumatic stress testing, which tells whether they really have post-traumatic stress. And we all probably have experienced some trauma. All of us.
Tell me he didn't start off with, this is a box.
It's awful. You're in shock. You can't believe it. It's disbelief. You don't sleep for days. And eventually, you have to go back to work. You take a week off. Life has to go on. Life has to go on. You go back to work. Kids are in school. You get a little time, right? Time heals, right? These veterans that come back from a deployment, they get back, they get some semblance of normalcy. They may or may not get some treatment, but time helps. Time heals. Everybody.
Which is why it was inappropriate to be assessed now.
Overcoming a divorce, overcoming a death, whatever trauma. Sarah Boone had no break. No break. Learned helplessness. Just giving up. Just giving up. I can't get out of this situation. They broke up. She'd go about 2 days. She'd go about 2 days. Texting, calling. Just learned helplessness. And it's, in the manual. Battered spouse syndrome is not, but what did you hear Dr. Harper say? She suffers from post-traumatic stress. That is a mental disorder.
Mhm.
You are actually undergoing the psychological effects of post-traumatic stress. You're not in your right mind. And it's repeating itself. It's repeating itself again and again, day in and day out. And when you look at this law, that's what you have to apply. Someone in Sarah Boone's shoes, when you're deciding whether her conduct was reasonable.
Should I have written the closing arguments yet?
Your notes. Not bad. It was something I wanted to read. Where'd that put it? Sarah Boone's long-term exposure to abuse created a state of learned helplessness and diminished her capacity to assess risk, especially in moments of heightened stress. The cyclical nature of this violence, the tension building, the battering, the contrition phases, caused Sarah to be trapped psychologically in that relationship. Due to this clear abuse, Sarah Boone had a reasonable belief of imminent harm under her state of mind. Jorge Torres had a history of violence against Sarah, and as a result, Sarah Boone's actions were the result of fear conditioned by abuse she endured over time. The cumulative effects of long-term abuse, as we saw her behavior on the 2-minute Suitcase video, is a trauma response. Sarah Boone acted out of a sense of preservation. While tragic, it was not driven by malice, but a mind ravaged by abuse. And I'm going to ask you to try to understand. Try to understand. Sarah Boone being emotionally and psychologically broken, whose actions may have been misguided attempts at survival but not murder. Imminent danger, her response reacted to that belief. It's somebody suffering from the long-term psychological effects of domestic violence. Who spent a lot of time? Dr. Brandon, you remember him. He was the first expert on trauma. Took some notes. Kevin Beck, you remember, did the direct examination of Dr. Brandon. He was from down in Miami, I think. He talked about the trauma that you cannot escape from the abuse, so you develop coping skills to protect yourself, knowing that the bad things will happen to me. It changes your behavior, not only your behavior, but your thinking. Your subjective thinking about fear and what to do. And if you remember, Dr. Brandon said it's all about that person's perception. Okay? A lot of times they will self-medicate with alcohol or drugs. A lot of times they suffer from anxiety. Basically, he said the trauma ends up being terror because you do not know what to expect. You do not know what is going to happen that night. It may be a great night. You may drink, and both of you have a great time. He falls asleep, passes out, you fall asleep, passes. But it may turn by depending on his mood. I don't know if you could tell, she would try to placate him. Dr. Brennan said, you know, when you're trying to evaluate somebody, it takes time to get them to trust you. And the ultimate goal, he said, is to be a behavioral detective. If you're a forensic psychologist, is to be a behavioral detective. And the ultimate goal is to put yourself in the abused person's eyes so you can better understand their world. But ultimately, it's their perception of danger. Their perception of danger is what you have to look at. What a reasonable person would do under their perception of danger. Now, I want to go on. Trauma experts explain how victims' reactions in moments of stress are the product of the damaged psyche. Her actions, although tragic, and it was a tragedy, Jorge Torres lost his life in that suitcase. It's a reactionary response to sustained trauma. It's as if Sarah was acting out of a deeply ingrained fear and helplessness developed over the years. So it's a desperate need for survival, but battered women do things to keep the peace from time to time. And when they feel like they have a small portion of momentary power, they may enjoy that by vocalizing their position to the abuser. Sarah Boone's not perfect. Sarah Boone would argue with him, talk down to him. Some would say was somewhat abusive to him. Sarah's not charged with that. Sarah Boone is not charged with that. And I want to read you something on that subject. Essentially, okay, I don't know where it's at. I'm gonna have to come back to it. But essentially what it said was eventually it's been a 2-week trial. I got a bunch of notes. I'm trying to get this right. I know it's important. What I wanted to say was someone can be mean and angry and hateful, intoxicated, and still be abused.
Mhm.
They're not mutually exclusive. And mutual abuse exists where one is abusive towards another. And eventually the victim, Sarah Boone, trying to fight back against the abuse, became verbally abusive. While the victim has committed verbal abuse, it is important to remember that they, Sarah Boone, are the victim and have been pulled into an extremely vicious cycle where they are trying to survive. Sarah Boone intentionally left Jorge Torres in the suitcase, which was the act of a battered spouse syndrome woman. She went up to her room, she fell asleep, and passed out. These actions are disconnected. Ultimately, she didn't let him out because of her fear that she knew if he got out in that moment, what he would do. That's real fear, that's real trauma, that she was experiencing at that time. Now, I talked to you about force being used. I think I talked to you about blocking an attack using a physical restraint like the suitcase to block somebody's attack. And the example I give, I got a couple of examples that may or may not apply. Let's say you're in a bar and you got your buddies and the other guy's got their buddies and they're drinking, and it ends up being an argument between two of them. And you realize that these two are fixing to get in it. Well, one of your buddies comes around on the other side and grabs the guy before he's able to strike him, right? So you're committing an offense on this guy, but it's a restraint. It's a restraint where you grab him by the neck and try to get him out the bar. So yeah, you're committing an act, but it's designed to defend another, which is legal. Or let's say you have a situation where you have a police officer and he's on patrol. You know, he's in uniform, he's wearing a firearm, and of course he's got the bulletproof vest. And he goes to a call where there's a suspect that may be armed. A suspect that may be armed.
And they go to reach in their pocket.
And so he gets there, he gets out of the squad car, he's walking around. Of course, he's taking out his gun because he realizes he may be armed.
That's like
Eventually, he
hypervigilance.
sees the suspect, and the suspect reaches for his waist. Now, in that moment in time, that officer has to make a decision.
Perceived imminent threat.
Am I going home with my family tonight? And I asked Dr. Werner about this Vaseline thing, it's called fear response or fight or flight. You know, those decisions are made, it's
Spontaneously.
based on your set of circumstances. She instinctively reacted to her unique set of circumstances to save her life or save herself from another one of these. I'm 63. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that. Her father's not around. I need to talk about the case a little bit. And if you'll remember, I'll get back to it. If you'll remember, that's what place here to go. Let's start with the witnesses, and then I'll talk about Sarah. But the first witness out of the box for the state, if you remember, was Juan Torres, the brother. Remember that? It was some time ago. I know it's been a while. Y'all taking notes. You may have to go back. Their first witness was a good witness for us. Their first witness in their prosecution of Sarah Boone for murder was a good witness for us.
What did I tell you? They'll turn their case against them.
Remember Tony Henderson did the cross-examine of Juan Torres. Asked him, what did you hear Sarah Boone say? Juan Torres, she was yelling, he's been choking me. He's been choking me. Mr. Henderson said, did that surprise you? Juan Torres said no. That family knew what was going on.
Yep, they sure as shit did.
police knew what was going on. The neighbors knew what was going on. Pearl Walker came in here, 80-something years old, in a wheelchair. Kevin Beck called her up. She saw it. Is there any doubt? Is there any doubt? I tell you why there's no doubt. In cross-examination, I got Dr. Warner to even admit. Did you hear it? Yes? Okay, Mr. Owens. She suffers from battered spouse syndrome. Wouldn't admit it on direct. Well, maybe I don't really know. I hadn't had enough time to really see her. You hadn't seen the pictures?
Mm-hmm.
You hadn't seen the 2-minute video?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen her one time earlier this month.
Mm-hmm.
One time. And she's going to start testifying about stuff she's never said before until she showed up in court. About, well, based on what she told me, I don't think she was in imminent fear. Come on. This is a courtroom. This is a courtroom. Good thing y'all are here. Well, thank you. But it gets even worse than that. It gets even worse than that here in this courtroom. The state attorney referred to these pictures. And I was going to rise up and show these pictures to you.
Yeah.
Overruled. You may proceed.
Good.
That I was going to rise up and show these pictures to you.
And minimize it.
Well, yeah, I'm going to do that. They put her on trial for murder. But what did they say? And I got to turn to this. Make sure I get this exactly like they said it. I took a bunch of notes. Let me make sure I got this quote. Can't even find it, but it was something to the effect, maybe Jorge Torres is the battered spouse. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Now you know why we're here. Now you know why we're here. Little boys learn early on that girls are different. You do not put your hands on a girl. You can't wrestle with them. You can't punch them. You can't kick them. You can't treat women that way.
It goes both ways.
When you become adults, I don't care what she does to you. I don't care what she says to you. If she gets in your face, whatever she does, you do not have a right to hit a woman.
You can tell he's old school.
No, sir.
Yeah. Look at that. He
What is
fully
the state
believes
trying to do?
his client.
Sustained.
He fully believes
What
it.
have they done?
Objection.
What evidence have they tried to put on?
Overruled.
Exactly.
What evidence have
None.
they tried to paint Sarah's? What evidence? Controlled and manipulated were the words they used. the 1900s. This is 2024. What's all these text messages? Why is that relevant? What are they trying to claim? She provoked his violence? She provoked his violence.
He's good.
Isn't
Not
that
according
what
to
they've
Twitter,
done
but
here
he's
in this trial?
Proper argument. Sustained.
We'll get back on this.
he's getting his ass chewed out on Twitter.
Abraham Marino.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember him.
Neighbor.
Abraham Marino changed his statement. They took a statement from Abraham Marino in which Sarah stated, I don't know if you remember, but it was when the police were all there.
Yeah. Yeah.
They got the tape out, and some neighbors were coming around, and there were 2 or 3 neighbors sitting around. He said Sarah came out and stated it was an accident. Okay? Well, then, it was an accident. And this Abraham Marino knew Jorge Torres from Philly. Okay? They were friends. They would talk either at the complex, or if Marino went to Hall's Ace Hardware or Ace Hardware, what it's called. The state attorney notifies.
Judge, I'm going to object to reading different things that are not in evidence.
Approach.
I wonder what it was. Yes, I do believe that I'm definitely of the minority when it comes to my thoughts on PTSD and battered wife syndrome and this defense and James Owen and his skills as a lawyer. Oh well. I'm happy to live life on the edge. I'm not a sheep. I'm not a follower. I just tell it like it is and see it, say it like it is. Say it as I see it. But he's still not, his defense strategy, like his defense closings, he's not reading off the jury instructions. He's put thought, he's put effort, and you can tell in his face that he is that type of conviction. Like he completely believes in what he's saying, and that comes across. I don't think she got any sleep last night. Look how messy her hair is. I wonder if she got a shower. Hmm. What if though? What if, the last 5 years of all the BS and the build up to this point here? Yes, she's a shitty woman with a narcissistic personality. She's entitled, she's selfish, she's all of those things. Doesn't make her a murderer either, though. I still can't see the actual intent there. Like, I know the zipping up of the suitcase, people think that's intent. I think that was part of what they were doing, part of the game. And then when she realized that he was in a secure place, that she felt safe enough to actually say some more than she normally would have. And if that provoked him, so it provoked him. But I don't know. At the end of the day, I do think she
You may proceed.
So 4.5 years.
believed that she was in danger.
Marino says, all I heard Sarah say that afternoon was it was an accident. Then he came in here today, or this week, and said, no, she said I was teaching him a lesson, things got out of hand, and then I fell asleep. 4.5 years later, we know he's friends with Torres. We heard it here. Now, I want to talk to you about the two boys that live right next door. You remember Vincent Battaglia and Brandon Motes? Remember those guys?
Mm-hmm.
And you remember it came out in the testimony, this event happened on February 23rd of 2020. But it came out in the testimony that Sarah had said, Jorge Torres, the night before, February 22nd of 2020, grabbed me by my hair and pulled me down the stairs in my apartment from top to bottom, which is consistent with what they were saying happened, remember? But they got their dates wrong. And remember, Mr. Henderson called Deputy Copsel or Detective Copsel up in our case, and she had to say, yeah, I didn't take their two statements until the 27th, February the 27th, remember? So they're remembering back, and they both had similar stories. Of course, they had time to talk by then, the 27th. I think the only recorded interviews they got that the night of this event, February 23rd, was from Sarah Boone and her ex-husband, Brian Boone, right? So they came back following up on the 27th. That's when they got
everything else aside, what's your opinion on James Owen's lawyering?
a statement from Brandon Motes and Vincent Battaglia. And at that time, they said, yeah, we heard that sound. You remember Sarah testifying? No, that was the night before. I complained about that, and I think one of them had testified. Yes, she had said something about being drugged down the night before. It may have been, can't remember now who it was, one of them. And, it looked like that there may be some implication that Sarah got him in the suitcase and pushed him down the stairs. But I think we didn't hear anything more of that. Remember? And then this photograph,
I honestly think he believes her. I really do.
which shows the bottom of the stairs. As you can see, there's Lucas's bookshelf right here. This is where Sarah Boone stored Lucas's stuff. And you can see it's not disturbed at all. Anyway, get back to Sarah. I want to talk a little bit about that, but let me talk a little bit about the law on justifiable use of force. Is legal and lawful if you reasonably believe, I think we all probably all already understand it by now. You reasonably believe it was necessary to prevent imminent threat.
This is where the DV, the protection orders will come in.
To harm. The law is crucial, ensuring that individuals can safeguard themselves in potentially dangerous situations. By acknowledging you have a right to defend yourself when you have a reasonable belief that force is necessary to prevent an attack. Okay? What did Mr. Henderson say in jury selection? You don't have to wait. You do not have to wait. If you're facing, in your mind, a reasonable imminent threat, you don't have to wait. Let's talk about Sarah Boone and this unconventional form of physical restraint to block the attack of Jorge Torres. What did she say? You saw it. Now, you got to think about that. You got to think about what was going on. You got to think about the trauma she was undergoing. You got to think about they've both been drinking. And you got to think about the fact that it was all fun and games for a while. And I think the biggest thing to know is that Jorge Torres chose to get in the suitcase. He's a grown man. That was his choice.
Comes
She
down
didn't
the top.
force him in at gunpoint to get into that suitcase. He voluntarily got into that suitcase because they were drunk and being silly and stupid and playing hide and seek. Which I guess when you get so drunk, that seemed like a good thing. Zipped him up, they're laughing, carrying on. And as you know, Sarah likes to videotape a lot. And I know you've seen some of these videos and you're wondering why, but I think the evidence shows that when George is being videotaped, he's not going to do anything. If you think about that, when George is being videotaped, that's like her power. You know, Dr. Harper said that Sarah's words are her power. Sarah's words are her power. Physically, she's no match for George. Physically, she's no match. But that's her power, is her words. When she gets a chance, to have some control, that's what she does. And she videotapes because she knows when she's videotaping, she can tell it like it is. I can tell him what I want to tell him. A couple of these videos you've seen, she's telling him like it is. But she's got that video camera on, and George knows he's being videoed. We've got one that we're going to show you in a little bit, where he loses it just a little bit, right at the end. And then, of course, we got the TV. But they're kidding around, playing around. Then, Sarah realizes, okay, this is my chance to say something to him. So she sits down, she turns on the phone, and you've seen the tape. For everything you've done to me, are the first words out of Sarah's mouth when the video begins. There's a lot packed into those words. Think about that. For everything you've done to me. This is how it feels when you choke me. Now that's in direct response.
He does the same thing as Kerry Morrissey, taking his glasses on and off.
And the result of the abuse that she has suffered at the hands of Jorge Torres. She wants him, for that moment, to feel how she feels. She wants for that moment to feel, for him to feel how she feels, how uncomfortable, lack of control that she feels when George is violent with her. Just for a moment, she wanted him to. And if you can imagine,
Approach.
What was that objection over?
I think from the evidence, you can determine she was crazy. She was crazy about that. And I don't know if, of course, it's a syndrome, but she felt like she couldn't do without it.
Felt like she could
And
change him.
let's say she videotapes him, and then it's turned off. And there's a 9-minute gap, 11-minute gap, whatever it is. I said 11, they're saying 9, but I think if you count 2 of the others, that's 9. But there's 9 minutes that we don't have video. But what did Sarah say? Now, if you remember when you listen on that video, George is talking in a normal voice. He's not stressed. Of course, if you're talking, you can breathe. She had said she had some air. And of course, she doesn't realize the situation, that it's going to end the way it ends. So she has no appreciation of that. It's a canvas. All she knows is an old canvas suitcase that she's got.
That was True Crime Metrics' argument.
The 2 zippers removed or spread out a little bit so he can. So she thinks he's not being serious. But eventually he gets angry. She gets angry, he gets angry. He says words to her, and then his hand starts to come out of the suitcase. She also said his tone changed. And I know everybody's got a cadence with their spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, but you know what I'm talking about. We've got a way of talking to people. We've got a way, your wife, your husband, you know each other.
Sometimes it's just a look,
You know, when they come in from work,
an
what kind of mood
expression.
they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Just by a couple of things, the way you just sense it, right?
Yep.
Well, especially somebody as hypervigilant as Sarah
Mm-hmm.
and as hypervigilant as a battered spouse woman
Yep.
would realize that he can flip the switch at any time. When I get out of here, I'm going to end you. And he realizes he's getting out. He got his hand out. At that moment in time, in Sarah's mind, that's an imminent threat. So she's got a justifiable right to use force. What did she do? She went over there and grabbed it. She lifted it up. She tried to get his hand back in, remember? She tried to get his hand to go back in. Wouldn't go back in, so her son's back was 3 feet away. Where the police found it the next morning. Same spot. No attempts to hide.
That's true. She didn't conceal anything.
To delete phone.
Nope.
No attempts to
No
tamper with
concealment
evidence.
whatsoever.
Nothing. In the same spot as it was. She picks up the bat. She pokes. She pokes him hard, trying to get him to stop trying to get out. And eventually he does. And you've seen the blunt force injuries, and you saw some of the circular injuries where you can tell there's a poking. I think it's right around here. And she poked him several times. You remember the pathologist said, I think, maybe 5, 6, or 7 times. She pokes him. And he's got some scratches. I don't know if they'll let you look at it, but on the back of that suitcase, it's got some bars, some metal bars that are inside the lining. There's some lining, and it's for support when you walk in. She testified. You heard what she said, that she was justified. That's uncontroverted testimony. Now, let's talk about the jury instructions just for a minute. And, I want to talk about reasonable doubt for a minute. Can't find the page, but I've got one. I've got one up here. Let me find it. If y'all are all looking. I think it's on page 15 of 22. And we're going to talk about reasonable doubt in a minute, but if you look at those bottom three short paragraphs, it is the evidence introduced in this trial and it alone that you're to look for the evidence or look for that proof. A reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant may arise from the evidence itself, a conflict in the evidence, or lack of evidence. But here's the main thing. And, obviously, I represent her, and I'm trying my best to show you honestly and fairly the doubt in this case. And 5 reasonable doubts, 17 reasonable doubts, 25 reasonable doubts. You have to have 1 reasonable doubt. I'm trying to show you throughout the evidence that each one of you can have a different reasonable doubt. Difference, but 1 reasonable doubt about the state's case, and your verdict is not guilty, according to law. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean proof beyond all doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, speculative doubt, or imaginary or forced doubt. Such a doubt must not influence you to return a verdict of not guilty if you have an abiding conviction of guilt. And this is a deeply held belief. Reasonable doubt is the highest standard we recognize in litigation. Car wreck or something like that is preponderance of the evidence standard, 51%, you're entitled. Abiding conviction, that's a deeply held belief that you must have if you're thinking about something. That's a firm belief. That's a level of certainty that you would have. That's what you got to have as a juror. I've got to be certain of her guilt. If, on the other hand, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, which we want you to do, there is not an abiding conviction of guilt, I'm not certain. I'm not certain of her guilt. Or if you have a conviction, I think there's some evidence of guilt, but it is one that is not stable, one which wavers and vacillates. One which wavers and vacillates. Then the charge is not proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and you should find the defendant not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. You understand that? You've got to be certain of guilt. That's the highest standard we've recognized. If I've got some evidence of guilt, so okay, there's some evidence for conviction, but it's not it's not stable. It wavers and vacillates. Then under our system, you've got a reasonable doubt. And you've got the power and authority and the obligation under the law, if that's the way you feel, to vote that way. Later in the instruction, it goes on, it's up to you to decide what evidence is reliable. You should use your common sense in deciding which is the best evidence and which evidence should not be relied upon in considering your verdict. You may find some of the evidence not reliable or less reliable than other evidence. You may rely on your own conclusion about the credibility of a witness. That is totally the province of the jury to decide. A juror may believe or disbelieve any or all the part of the evidence of the testimony of any witness. I want to show you this before I forget it. But Dr. Warner said, this is their expert again. He testified that Sarah Boone suffers from battered syndrome. Battered women's experiences affect her perception of imminent danger. Those past experiences with Jorge Torres those past experiences with George Torres, and there's a bunch, affect their perception. Remember Dr. Brandon, Michael Brandon talked about perception of imminent danger. Victims of repeat violence may fear death in situations others would not. The reason Sarah experiences all this, the reason she was feeling the way she was feeling, that imminent threat of danger from George, was because of George Torres. George Torres is responsible for her mental state because of the way he has violently treated her. She reacted to his attempts to get out because of the way he treated her and the way she knows what is he going to do if he gets out of the suitcase? She knows. The second video is played. She's flipped it back upside right. You hear him, it's 22 seconds. He says, Sarah, she's not going to open that suitcase. She's not going to open that suitcase. He's already threatened her. She used the bat to get him to stop trying to get out of it. Why would she do that? Why would she do that? I know what he's going to do. I know what he's going to do to me. I know him like I know him more than he knows himself. I know what he's going to do to me. You don't have to wait. That was justifiable. Now, you got to understand this. She intentionally used the bat to defend herself. She intentionally didn't unzip him to defend herself. Both of those are lawful under our law. She went upstairs. The dogs were upstairs. At some point, she called her husband, or ex-husband, Brian Boone. We know that many times she testified, or somebody in court said she would often flee to her ex-husband's house sometimes. I believe that testimony came out from either Sarah or somebody. That sometimes she would flee, or sometimes she would flee to upstairs. One of those two. But the dogs were up there. She made a phone call. At some point, she fell asleep, passed out, fell asleep. We don't know. They had 2 big bottles of wine. Right? That was unintentional. That was unintentional. His death was unintentional. You remember when she was in the interrogation room? You remember that? Now, I don't know if we did a good job of this, but it came out that she got arrested. You remember the one time when she got the black eye? She got arrested for strangulation. And you remember that? They ended up over there by the dryer, and he was banging her back of her head on the floor that had very little carpet on it. And she ended up getting her arms out, and then she grabbed his neck. And she eventually got him off of her. And that's when he got up and stomped her in the eye. Remember? Well, the police came for that event, and they took statement, and Sarah was honest with the officers about what all, and they arrested her. You remember? Remember that? They arrested her. And she said, why? I was fighting back. You remember that? Why? I was fighting back. So from that point on, she didn't trust law enforcement. The video that they showed a while ago about George, that was about dropping the case, where she was defending herself and fighting back. I want to talk about this investigation by law enforcement. Now, she didn't know the law. She's not a lawyer. She gets up the next morning. Brian's calling. Sarah's got to pick up Lucas at 3. Brian's calling. Eventually she walks down. She's looking for George. Where's George? He's quiet down there. And she looks in the bathroom. She looks out. He's smoking a cigarette. He's on the computer. She sees the suitcase. And you can imagine.
Objection, overruled.
Sustained.
She sees him in the suitcase. She panics. What does she do? What does she do? She tries to get her fiance out of the suitcase. They're engaged to be married. She's not trying to kill him. They're engaged to be married. She gets him out. She tries to do, he's purple. She tries her best to do CPR. She doesn't, you heard her, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, call Brian. That's her safety valve. That's all she's got. Brian eventually says, she's come over. She calls again in 2 minutes. I'm on the way. He gets there. You got to call 911. May have told her before, call 911. She calls 911. She tries to do CPR again. Is she busy trying to hide evidence? She busy trying to hide evidence? She busy trying to hide the back? No, she's trying to save his life. If she can. So the police get there. She knows if she told them, she fought back, she's going to be arrested. That's what happened before. What happened before? Like George has said on the video, she'd never been arrested before. Before that time, she was charged with that with George. She lies. She lies. She's scared. She's scared. She doesn't know what to do. So she lies. She makes a decision to lie. Don't trust law enforcement. She doesn't know the law. She doesn't call a lawyer. She talked to Officer Rodriguez, who was the first short black female that came up here first, the first one that arrived with body cam. Talks to her. There's a recorded statement there where she doesn't tell the whole story. She lies. And then the detectives eventually get there and get her in the squad car. You hear the audio. I think it was played. She lies again. Then the next day, she goes down to the sheriff's department. Now, if they would have told her, hey, man, we're going to arrest you. And she gets a lawyer to go down there to make a statement. And the lawyer would advise her.
Objection, facts and evidence.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Stricken. The jury will pay no mention or give any weight to that statement.
She's not a lawyer. She didn't have a lawyer present when she made this statement. She didn't know the law. She didn't know she was justified in defending herself the way she did in this dysfunctional, toxic, abusive relationship. I don't know if you remember, it was a 2-hour video, but there were some things she said, not intentional. And eventually, she wanted the detective, it was Detective Lowen, the male detective. And she said, I swear to you on my son's life, it was not intentional. What she was talking about was that George passed, was that George died. That was not intentional. She thought he was fine in there. Would he sober up? We've learned from their history, when Sarah gets drunk, she calls for help. When George gets drunk, he beats Sarah. That's their pattern. How many times do we see Sarah call the law? That's their pattern. Sarah told him, I didn't know, I think she said, I didn't know something like this could happen. I've never done it before. And Detective Lowen said, well, what did you expect was going to happen? I've got a daughter that she was about 18 or 19, and she got a grandmother's hand-me-down pickup truck. It was an older truck, but she didn't have it long, and she was gassing it up, but she didn't put any oil in it. Eventually, it burnt them up. And you don't know what you don't know. I hadn't done a good job of explaining, hey, you got to put oil in it too. Sarah Boone didn't know that he could die in there. It's an old beat up canvas suitcase that she left a gap in. And as naive as that sounds, she didn't appreciate the danger. I mean, is that the way you want to kill somebody? Is that the way you're going to do it? She had Lucas to take care of it. Am I going to go to prison doing it like this? No attempt to hide the crime. I think the evidence is clear. That's how this happened. I don't want to belabor the point. I do want to show you. Just quickly show you the hinges. Sarah Boone got stabbed. Well, think about that. Stabbed with a steak knife in the leg. And she stayed with him. She stayed with him. Poked between the eyes with a curtain rod. Stalked in the eye. And who does that? The law empowers an individual to defend their life and safety when faced with a threat and to prevent an attack. That's what Sarah Boone did. That's what Sarah Boone did. I think it's important to understand Sarah had to be the parent a lot of times. It was her place. She had that $1,000 a month from the divorce settlement coming in. She had the car. She had the phone. She had the keys. she had to be the parent in a lot of ways. I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Harper. If you remember, Dr. Harper is from Okaloosa County, which is up in the Panhandle, close to where you were from. And she's the doctor that treated Sarah from early on. Remember, this happened in 2020. I think she first saw Sarah Boone shortly thereafter. And over the 4.5 years, saw her 9 times and did all the testing for post-traumatic stress. Of course, she has the experience from veterans, and she's testified that she's now traveling around the state, testifying as a forensic psychologist. But she talked about how important it was to develop trust with the patient over a course of time. It's just going to take time when you have somebody suffering that kind of trauma or that kind of damaged psyche. It's going to take some time to get them where they can trust you and really tell you and talk to you and tell you what's going on with you. She talked about that Sarah uses her words for power. I think her testimony, I think the evidence supports that her testimony was credible.
Objection.
The evidence supports that her testimony was
Objection
credible.
is sustained.
I can't give my person. Okay. The evidence supports that her testimony was credible because of the time that she spent, because of the number of tests that she did, that she diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol use disorder, I think anxiety disorder, and battered spouse syndrome. Dr. Warner confirmed that. And Dr. Michael Brannon, the first witness, he was brought in as a subject matter expert. So he hadn't treated Sarah. He was just testifying about the condition. He's been doing it a long time. He's an expert at it. And that's to advise you to try to understand what's going on. And as crazy as it sounds, in this syndrome, they try to protect the abuser. They're in love with them. They try to protect them. I don't know if you remember that there was a time where Sarah Boone had a conversation with one of the neighbors, and they were talking about something. She said, "Did you hear anything yet last night?" Remember, she said, "Shh, it's okay." Both George and Sarah lied to the police. They lied to medical people. I don't know if it's shame, but it just comes with the syndrome that you stay trapped in it. I think another big, if you'll think about this, when Sarah gets beaten by George, she calls the police. When Sarah gets beaten by George, she calls the police. And a lot of times she just wants him out. Just get him out. Get him to leave. She doesn't want him to get in trouble. She just wants him out. There never was a report of George calling the police on Sarah. She wasn't physically abusing him. The state is trying to present evidence that she emotionally abused it.
Sustained.
Strike.
Stricken. Members of the jury will pay no attention to that comment. Give it no weight whatsoever.
I believe the evidence that's been presented by the state is an attempt to show that Sarah mentally or emotionally abused Jorge Torres. Again, she's not charged with that. She's not perfect. Some of that was her trauma. In Sarah's situation, you do become numb and hardened, I think, over time. That's a coping mechanism. It's a day-to-day thing, some good days, some, you know. But the homicide detectives, I know if you saw that 2-hour video, at some point during the 2-hour video, they started talking about some of the violence. And they go, we know. They had already checked with neighbors or whoever. They knew. The neighbors knew, police officers knew who responded, Torres' family knew. They all knew about the abuse. Dr. Harper testified that abused women act differently when they perceive a threat. I think Sarah Boone was loyal to a fault to George, even through all the abuse. Judge, I want to make a comment about a couple of things that were said by the prosecutor in opening statement.
You may proceed.
The prosecutor in opening statement, when he was talking about George Torres passing away, he started talking about Sarah Boone. And his quote was, because I wrote it down, George, in Sarah Boone's mind, George Torres deserved it. George Torres deserved it. That's the position they're taking. He deserved to die. She loved the man. She wasn't trying to kill him. He also commented about,
Judge, maybe it was voting.
Yes.
I'm not typing. Actually, I need to alter my time on the verdict stream. It's not going to happen in half an hour. Excuse me. Yeah, no, there's no way it's going to run in 20 minutes time. Let's make that a little bit later today. There we go. I'm getting weary. So it's what, 6:08 p.m. over there now. You all must be pretty weary too. Oh, look, eat a hef, there's a hottie. You really think so? Because I thought the complete opposite. I really did. I thought the state's closing was really, really lazy. Like, yeah, she was a hottie. Yeah, I thought it was really lazy. They basically, you pretty much read the jury instructions back to them. Like, that's it. I don't know. You'd think after 5 years. 5 years notice of time to prep. They would come up with something a little bit more, I don't know. And as James Owen said, what evidence have they put forward? Really, they've put forward 2 videos and some text messages, which took, that was within the first 48 hours from the extraction from her phone. What else have they done? What else have they put forward? I just think they've been really, really lazy and they've dropped the ball, and I don't know. And what really sealed it for me was the dodginess of their expert witness and rebuttal. Like that, just that really rang dodgy. Really. Why would you leave it until 4 days before a trial to get an expert witness? If you thought that you thought for a second, okay, you've charged this woman with second-degree unaliving, and you've watched her go through 9 attorneys, surely in their minds they're going, and then this chick's, yet they didn't get her assessed by anybody. No one.
The prosecutor said in opening.
No, the state hasn't done rebuttal yet.
The violence.
That's next.
The violent episodes. It's a bunch of violent nonsense. Was his statement to you, an opening statement?
A bunch of violent
All this
nonsense.
photographs. There's a bunch of violent nonsense. You'll have to make your mind up whether that's that.
They did their rebuttal witnesses, which was the
There were a
expert
couple of exhibits.
and the drunken videos
that I
yesterday
heard
and the
it's
text
late.
messages this morning.
There were no contact provisions where there had been a court order from a judge, not only a verbal order, but it was reduced to writing. So there was a court order for Jorge Torres not to have any contact with Sarah.
Told you.
Okay. Court system got involved.
Mhm.
To have no contact with Jorge Torres.
And this goes towards
Now,
her stand your
we
ground.
talk a little bit about that. And they talked about coercion, coercive control, power and control. We know about his abuse. We know he destroyed the home, the TV. We know about his jealousy.
All right.
You know,
Now think about the defense's argument and the motivation behind those actions. Thought processes going on that induced those actions. Just as a hypothetical, just as nothing about her, just purely based on that diagnosis and that history of abuse in your head. Flip the coin. Yeah, no. Well, yeah, they were. And the defense's facts are the same. You can't change facts. Facts, they can't be changed. It's the interpretation of the facts. It's the perception. It's the whole, like, you perceive it one way and I perceive it another, and they both are either right or wrong or indifferent. It makes no difference. But we both have seen the same things and yet we both have different reactions to it. And that's what I'm saying, is that what it might look like to someone on the outside could look completely different to another person on the inside, even though you've both seen the same things. That's what I'm saying. Her reaction may seem like to you that it's one way because of that, because of A, because you've interpreted that bit wrong, differently, and the same goes the other side. Do you know that? I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah, it's all in, and not only our interpretation, but her interpretation. That's what it comes down to. Do you honestly think there was an element of fear there? Because even if there was even a little bit of fear, that still creates doubt. And with the diagnosis of experts and the description of how those diagnoses can affect both perception and their behavioural traits and stuff, and then you add on top of that the narcissistic traits where, she's an arrogant little fucker, but, and then you put alcohol on top of that. So not only is your perception changed, but your, I don't honestly believe she went up the stairs to bed thinking that she would wake up to a dead boyfriend. I don't even think that she was capable of thinking that far. I don't even know if she even considered it. And yes, that's culpable negligence. Absolutely. Every day of the week, she had a disregard. It was blatant, but I don't think it was willful. But then how do you define willful? It's like apples, oranges. It's one of those things, my love, unfortunately. But I'm just really impressed at the depth that he's gone into establishing all of the factors that meet this criteria. Not like he's had 45 days. Not only has he had to identify these things in the documentation, in discovery, then he's had to create a defense around it and then fight for it and prove it. And he's done that. I don't know. And he didn't even employ the state witness. He used all of the evidence that was already collected before him. So, I don't know. I don't know why I have this. I don't know if it's sympathy for her, but no, I don't know. Excuse me. It's not sympathy because I don't like her as a person, but that's not here nor there. I think she's been unfairly judged from the very beginning, and it's snowballed into almost contempt towards her. Anywho, we'll find out in the next few days, won't we? One way or the other.
Some of the things he said to her. You know about how he treated her dogs nicely when he was sober, but at times abused the dogs or threatened to do so.
Yeah, but then you've got the disinhibition of the alcohol on board as well. And she doesn't think that he's in danger. She doesn't think that he's, like, she thinks he can breathe. She thinks that the suitcase is material. So she doesn't think that there is an issue. And that ability to make that decision is impaired even more with the alcohol on board. You can even hear it in her voice. She can have it. Mm.
If you think about power and control, when you're controlling a person, and I think she testified that he kind of smothered her, it's always around her. Part of his fear was her realizing that she'd had enough and to leave him for good. That she would get the strength over time if she had enough time away from him.
No, absolutely.
Or
Yeah.
she wasn't in control of it.
I don't agree with her actions at all. That's not an excuse whatsoever.
Enough time away, she would come to her senses and realize she could do better.
No, don't think that's true, James. Sorry.
Judge has been giving court orders all week. I didn't stop George Torres. George Torres knew he was going to lose control if she had a bunch of time away from him. She might move on. He was willing to violate a court order to maintain control. That's George Torres. I want to show a couple of videos. And I want to say something to you.
Toxic
Show
codependence.
if we could dim the light.
Yes.
But I will say another thing too. You put the shoe on the other foot and it was her in the suitcase, I guarantee you'd get second-degree murder because they would be arguing that he put her in there. So now this is what I was saying before, this video here. This is he's spastic. I can cover it well because he's a seasoned drinker, right? He's downed quite a fair bit of vodka, apparently, as she says. And she said to him that the night before, I've got to go to work early tomorrow. I'm going to bed early. You're drunk. You're drinking. You're going to keep me awake. Stay downstairs for the night. Don't disturb me. So what does he do? 1 o'clock in the morning, he's at her bedroom door. And of course you're going to crack the shits. And I think that I didn't even think of the reason that he said about having, the video camera there as protection for her. But I thought it was more to say to him the next day, look, this is what you did last night and you don't even remember. And he knows he's done the wrong thing because that's why he's cowering. He's got massive self-esteem issue, massive. You can see that. And so he's now in that honeymoon phase again. Okay, so he's done that. It doesn't have to be a physical abuse. That abuse has been disturbing her sleep. I can't even put it into words, but he knows that he's done the wrong thing by what she's asked, obviously. And so, yeah, she's berating him. Don't agree with anything that she says. She should not, but you see him nearly lose it in this video. And I actually turned this around because I've got a father that's an alcoholic. So I recognize some of the traits in that behavior. So I don't know. And just the fact that he still stayed there. He didn't leave. Like, he can't be without her. If a normal person wouldn't sit at your bedroom door and wake her up, but also a normal person wouldn't sit there and curl up in the corner when you've said, hey, piss off, you've woken me up. I told you not to wake me up. I've got to go to work in the morning. They would fuck off downstairs again. And just watch the behaviour of him needing to stay there, needing it, instead of just what's coming out of her mouth. Pretend you can't hear a word of what's being said. I don't agree with it. Just watch this one.
Do you understand? As of this moment, and until I can get you out, get the fuck out of here. You're
Repeat.
I dare you.
Did you see him?
Yep, look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wait, get away from me. Get away from me. Get away from me. I'm gonna scream bloody murder. I'm gonna scream bloody murder.
Did you see him flip the switch? In that instance?
Mm-hmm.
Where he lost it? Even though the
They
video
didn't
was
show
going.
all of it. Sorry, they
Show the next one.
that was halfway through. Oh. All right. Now, you've seen that. How long? If I was to watch that, if that was in my partner, my thought would be, if he can do that to the TV, how long is it going to be before he does that to me? He doesn't even seem like he's enraged. He seems, yes, he's breathing heavily and he's probably angry, but he's not out of control.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge. You turn it off. Can you turn it off? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to finish up right here.
Oh, absolutely not. And same back at you, darling. Absolutely.
Sarah Boone,
I'm not,
I've gotten to know.
I don't, did not even take offense at all
Sustained.
whatsoever. But yes, I agree. Had the
Sarah
tables
Boone
been
is like any
turned, it
other
would be,
citizen.
for sure. For
Equal
sure.
justice under the law.
Now imagine her hitting
She
like
should
that
be
while he's
treated
in a
like
suit.
any other citizen.
Yeah, yep. I agree.
Fairly and impartially. Based on the circumstances she was facing at the time of this tragedy.
Nobody has the right to put their hands on anybody, regardless of gender. Nobody. I'm sorry. Well, occasionally you might have a bit of hair pulling. Sorry. You were taking it there, weren't you?
Based on the battered
Oh,
spouse
dear.
instruction, which is a special instruction that's given when women have a heightened sense of fear and trauma. That you're
I don't know,
utilizing
if it's been a while.
in applying her subjective standard to the reasonable standard of what a reasonable person would do under her
The only
circumstances,
male that's been in my
and
room,
using the force that she
been a
used
very purry one.
to defend herself. I hope I hadn't missed anything. I tried my best. Sarah Boone fought back and survived. We ask that you do justice in this case and find her not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. I've tried to show you where the doubt was. I trust your judgment.
Because that's all they've got to
Spent a long
do.
time picking the jury, 4 days. We trust you.
That's all they've got to do.
We appreciate your service
Doubt.
and your obligation to do your duty. You have the power and authority to right this wrong. That's what we're asking you to do. And give Sarah Boone some hope for a better life and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any rebuttal?
Yes, sir.
You may
Course it
proceed.
is. Yeah. And the problem is, if she does walk with time served, I don't think she's eligible for any parole conditions, is she? Or like